Welcome to LinguaBees podcast. Today we are honored to welcome Dr. Troy Crawford, a Mexican scholar with an extensive academic background in language studies in education. He holds a doctorate in philosophy in language studies from the University of Kent, Canterbury, where his research focused on ESL writing in the University of Guanajuato, the struggle to enter a discourse community. He also holds a master's degree in industrial relations with an specialization in organizational development from the University of Guanajuato, a master's degree in education with an specialization in TESOL from the University of London, and completed graduate studies in administration with an specialization in finance at the University of Guanajuato. He earned his bachelor's degree in Spanish literature and Latin American political science from the University of Southern Oregon. Dr. Crawford Lewis has published numerous articles and book chapters on topics such as identity in second language writing, discourse, and language learning. His work has appeared in journals such as Profile and the Colombian Applied Linguistics Journal, as well as in edit academic volumes published at the University of Guanajuato and other institutions. He taught undergraduate courses at the Licenciatura en Enseñanza del Inglés in University of Guanajuato for several years. He also directed the undergraduate and graduate thesis related to language learning and discourse. He has been a member of professional and academic organizations such as Mestizo, the editorial board of Mestizo Journal, the Colombian Journal of Applied Linguistics, and research networks such as RECAL and Red de Investigación Interdisciplinaria sobre Identidades, Racismo y Xenofobia en América Latina. Dr. Crawford Lewis, welcome to LinguaBees podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today, Doctor. So, in today's episode, we're going to focus on one particular piece of your work, your doctoral thesis, ESL Guiding in the University of Guanajuato, the struggle to enter a discourse community. Your thesis argues that second language guiding classrooms construct ideas about guiding to the discourse communities and establish classroom practices, especially taking American English as the benchmark. Could you explain how these preconceived notions shape students' identities as graders and why challenging the current system can be difficult?
Well, all you need to do is think about how you learned or the way you were taught to write in English. First, it's very presumptuous for someone to say, I'm going to teach you how to write in English. Well, the person in your classroom, in this case you're two, you already knew how to read and write. You learned that in your primary school, like anybody else. So you're not being taught how to write. You already know how to write. You know how to communicate in the written language, in your native language, and you've been doing it your whole life. You kind of need to adjust that statement. It's not, I'm going to teach you to write. It's, I want to try to show you how a different group of people use written language to communicate. And that's not the case. Brought to you just that I'm going to teach you how to write. And depending on how you're taught, it can be something that's enjoyable or it can become quite painful. I go back to the way it was taught when I first came to the University of Guanajuato, where we taught writing. We said, okay, you're going to learn how to write a composition. A composition has to be broken down into either 3 paragraphs or 5 paragraphs. There's an introduction, you develop, there's a conclusion. They all have to be connected. And that sounds nice, but when you start breaking it down, the way that's done in other languages aside from English, it's not exactly the same. And not everybody is taught to write that way. That's the standard practice that's done in the United States, only in the United States, not done in Australia, not done in England or any other English-speaking country, only in the United States. And so there's what tends to be an implied expectation that students come into the classroom already knowing this, when this has absolutely nothing to do with writing. What it has to do with is a social convention. It's the way writing is taught in one particular country. And since our textbooks come mostly from the United States and the UK, this gets filtered into the textbook. And I don't know, maybe you've had that experience when you were taking, if you took English classes here in Mexico, where they said, okay, we want you to write a paragraph or we want you to write a composition, to give you these norms that don't exactly match the way you were taught to write when you went to school. And I suffered the same thing too, learning Spanish. I would try to write things and I would get told by my boss, this is wrong. You don't do this that way. And I was like, no, yeah, that's how I was taught. I was saying, no, this is what I was taught to do. This is what I'm supposed to do. So, I mean, that's the first thing. It's cultural conventions influence and shape the way we use the written language. Okay. And generally speaking, that hasn't been taken into account when working with second language. And it's mostly just kind of what bothers me the most, I guess, is this presumptuous attitude when someone says, I'm going to teach you to write. No, you're not going to do that. In fact, most second language teachers have absolutely no idea how to actually teach a person to read and write. That's a completely different skill. It's cognitive. It's something we explicitly need to be taught. And that further goes into this question with writing. When you learn a language, as we all did growing up, we listened to the people around us and we started speaking. Where did we learn to read and write? Today, some people at home, they've helped them out, but generally, you got to school. And that's what I okay, we're going to learn the alphabet. You got the alphabet, how it goes together, learning how to write. You didn't do this magically by yourself. Somebody needed to show you how to do it. Okay. So that process, which is a cognitive learning process that we do in the primary school, that's not what we do in the ESL classroom. So just for starters, just saying, I'm going to teach you how to write is a false statement. No. What's going to happen is I'm going to try to show you how English speakers organize language when it's written to communicate with one another and show you how it's different from the way you write in your native language so that you can have the ability to shape words in a written text that can go to different culture, different audiences. That's what's trying to be done. To do that, doing that is something that requires you to be a little bit humble and start with, okay, no, the way I learned to write is not this universal norm. It's something that works for the community where I grew up. And beyond that, there's a question mark. Maybe it works, maybe and that's the part, I guess it's always bothered me because I've seen things over the years that are, I would only describe them as shameful. I remember seeing two students sitting crying. They were looking at the written composition and what was written on there, I won't say who the teacher was, but what was written on there was just that you do not print when you're writing a composition. It must be in cursive. That's really completely irrelevant to anything that's going on. But those kind of things occur, or the same way that the common phrase in English, you start every sentence with the subject. Well, you do it in English because English is a nominal language. It's all the clauses are nominal. It requires a head noun at the beginning to make a sentence. But Spanish, Italian, French, they don't require that. It's not necessary to do that to structure a sentence. And so, no, you don't necessarily start every sentence with a noun, right? So it's I guess that's trying to I think the teacher needs to be a little bit more flexible and less presumptuous about what it is that they're doing. Okay. You're not really teaching, it's more showing a way to organize the language. That's what it is, I think. I don't know. That answers the question. That's kind of what comes to my mind when you say those things.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Your answer definitely completes what I was asking you to, and I agree with a lot of things that you say here and also in your thesis about how knowing the rhetoric of different languages can influence the writing skills of a community. And I think a clear example is the one that you bring about how in Spanish or other Romance languages, we don't need to use the subject all the time. And that is something that I can see that the students struggle with when they are writing in English.
And that links to our second question. In your thesis, you, doctor, mentioned the idea of a rhetorical clash between students' cultural knowledge and teacher expectations. Could you explain what this clash looks like in the classroom?
It can look a lot of different, it can be very subtle and it can be very confrontational. I'll give you an example of confrontation. When I was about halfway through my thesis, I gave a presentation specifically on the question you just asked at a Mextisol event. It was in Puebla, I believe. And I brought up the point that I was trying to just get students in the classroom in Mexico coming in have certain expectations for writing. You go back to the classes and you had to take in mostly in high school, it's called, where the reading is a taller de redacción that you have in the prepa. And that class tends to be, you learn how to write in different literary forms. In the United States, similar class, you learn how to write 3 and 5 paragraph essays that it accumulates in a what we call an extended composition that's usually 7 or 8 pages. So the way that is different. So you're bringing in different expectations into the classroom. And this presentation, all I said was, we need to be a little bit more humble when we're approaching this because we're not teaching people how to write. We're showing them how to work in a different language. And a teacher from some university stood up and started screaming at me and said, "That's false. I teach writing in my university, and Mexican students do not know how to write. I teach them how to write. They have no idea how to do it." And fortunately, I didn't have to answer because I was thinking, what am I going to say to this person? Fortunately, a lot of the people in the audience started laughing, and the person just got angry and walked out. Well, I mean, if you think of that statement, how arrogant it is. Every person in every country in the world that goes through their educational system knows how to write in their country's native language. Okay. Some of us do it really well. Some of us do it so. Some of us are very good at it, but we can all do it. And so that claim, I'm teaching you to write, that's one. But the other one is expectations. And the core expectations is highlighted in a study that was done was a researcher, Montano Harmon, that she took roughly 2,000 junior high school students in Mexico City and 2,000 junior high school students in Southern California and just asked them to write a little short essay saying, how did you learn to write in school in your country? And then they looked at how was it structured. And what we discovered was that the average composition written by a student here in Mexico had about, I think it was 4 or 5 sentences. And the sentences had somewhere between 17 and 20 words per sentence. Okay. And then you looked at the US students and they had like sentences. And there was only 6 or 7 words in the sentence. Okay. So on the surface, the first thing you see is, well, okay, the sentences in Spanish and Mexico tend to be longer. The ones in the US tend to be shorter. And then you discover that, well, in practice in the US, almost all sentences are composed of 1 or 2 clauses. Very rarely are there 3 clauses. That's you start finding this in academic writing. But in Mexico, children are taught from a very young age to write sentences that have 2, 3, 4 clauses. And then you add in something else too. In the US, each one of those clauses has to be separated by a comma or semicolon. But in Spanish, sometimes you don't put the comma or the semicolon. You use a relative clause in there, okay, just to slap them together. And so that brings us to the second factor too, is it punctuation. We talk about the rules of punctuation. Every country in the world has slightly different rules of punctuation. And even inside countries, there's arguments and discussions. There's a very old short essay written by Mark Twain talking about a big argument in the state of Kansas that people were fighting over who was teaching the right way to use punctuation in the state of Kansas, because there were different views on how to use it. Punctuation is totally arbitrary. It's something that we've developed over time. So structure the sentences. What happens? A student in Mexico tends to write a very long sentence with 2 or 3 clauses. What does the teacher do? No, make them smaller, shorten your sentences, connect them together. And the student is sitting there, huh? They don't think, no, I've been told this, but they're going back over thinking, well, no. In primary school, okay. In junior high school, this was okay. In high school, this was okay. In my other classes here in the university, this is okay. Why would I do this? It makes no sense. It goes against everything I've been taught. Okay. And so, but you're not going to be able to, in all likelihood, your student's not going to be able to express it. Then too, unfortunately, the teacher can't express it either. And I mean, I'm guilty of that. I mean, I can remember when I first started teaching how I would yell at students and good God, can't you just make your sentence simple and correct? And I think, what, getting them to shorten them down? But what happened too, I was doing this as a teacher, but then I was working in administration and I was getting called in and said, your oficio, it's wrong. What? You can't say this directly. You need to use a longer sentence. You need to, this doesn't make any sense. Okay. And that's what pushed me to want to look at this. Curiously, the expectations of how a sentence should be put together and how a paragraph should be organized in Spanish in Mexico and how it should be done in the United States are almost completely contradictory. The only thing that they coincide on is both languages use a lot of, what do you call it? Conjunctions. But how you put it together, it's completely different. It took me about 5 years of explicit training in the University of Guanajuato to learn how to write just the oficios to send to different places acceptably. Okay. But when I was learning that, I didn't stop and think, oh, look, here's a different way to structure your language. I was just like, okay, this is what they want. This is what I'm going to do. And I think that's what a student does. Okay, the teacher asked me to do this. I'm going to do that because that's what they're asking for. Because there's no rational logic behind it. It's just it's a cultural construction. These group of people do in this place. This is what this group does over here. So it's just like being bilingual. I need to be have biliteracy. I need that when it's written, it's also done a little bit differently. And so the fact that they're different, but then you add to it that students, like I was when I was learning a second language, I didn't understand that it was done differently in Spanish. It just seemed confusing to me. Okay. Even to this day, sometimes it's hard for me to read a novel written by a Mexican because the language is so redundant and overlapping. It's hard for me to process it mentally sometimes. And I read slower when I read in Spanish. So, I mean, this information, students don't have it, and your average ESL instructor doesn't know either. One says, you're wrong. And the one who says you're wrong has the power because they grade you and make an evaluation of you. And the students just seem like going, what's going on? They have to, or they suffer consequences. So I think that tension is consistently in the classroom. And I'm sure you've probably experienced it. When you're writing in English and you have to use something, you go, oh, no, that doesn't sound right. Okay, what do you mean? No, I don't like the way it sounds. Well, what do I change? And they can't give you anything concrete. They can't tell you specifically, no, make these specific modifications in a sentence for the, it's just, or they say, oh, this is confusing. Why is it confusing? Usually when they say it's confusing, it's because the sentences aren't linked with the, what do you call it? The noun to noun in English. You start the sentence with a noun, you write a sentence, the next sentence must refer back to that first noun you put in there. We don't necessarily do that in Spanish. And so, what do you call it? That's probably what they mean, that the sentences aren't sequentially linked as required in English. But they can't explain that to you. And so it just says, oh, that's confusing, or that doesn't make sense. And that's what I mean by clash, because it's not, nobody is doing anything intentionally negative or intentionally wrong. But the problem is there is a confusion, and the person who suffers in this equation is the student. And I take this from my own experience because I look back how I taught English as a second language before I was aware of this and after I was aware of it. And it dramatically changed how I approach teaching. And it's just listening experience to students the same way when I was, it doesn't necessarily have to be in another language. I learned how to write in English in the US. Finally, I learned how to write in Spanish in Mexico. Then I go to England to do my PhD. And the first large section of my thesis that I wrote, and I turn it in. And when I supervisor looks at me, he just goes, Troy, we do something with your writing because you sound like you're ignorant and have no education. And I'm like, huh? And he goes, you just sound too American and it doesn't sound right. And I was like, what the hell is that? He goes, I don't know what to tell you. You need to talk to some specialist because your writing doesn't sound right. I had a local supervisor from the University of Memphis. It's a friend of mine, Emily Thrush. And I was talking to her and I said, Emily, I don't know what they're talking about. She laughed. She's also a specialist in writing. She goes, that's because in the United States, our verbs are dominated by phrasal come from German. The British prefer the Latin-based verbs, and they also prefer the Latin-based nouns. Just make sure all of your nouns and verbs are Latin-based, remove all the German-based ones, and they'll be okay. I was like, really? Yeah. Okay. Do that. And I was like, oh, you sound good now. But even the person they didn't know exactly what to tell me. They just said, like, this doesn't sound right for the British. And I'm like, okay, but that doesn't help me. And from experiencing that, just talking with because I had classmates from all over the world that were doing their PhD, talking to them, and it's like, I started asking them, what's going on? They're going, this is hard. I don't understand. I don't get what they want. We're doing a PhD and students tell me, what do they mean by thesis statement? Well, that's the statement you're going to investigate, and that's what you're going to separate, and you're going to try to take it apart. And a Chinese student goes, theses exist? That's not possible. And I was like, they don't exist. And I was like, no, they don't exist. Well, you're going to have to figure it out because that's the whole foundation of English speaking people and their and postgraduate studies. To create a thesis statement, and that thesis statement, you have to argue for and against what's going on and contrast it. And he's like, no, you can't do that. There's one right answer to everything. There's no possible to do that. And it's like, I don't know how he worked it out over the time, but how, I don't know. But I mean, just listening to all of the students, it's all the same thing. And you ask them, how did you learn to write? My fellow PhD students, how did you figure out how to write your thesis? I read other theses and I copied what I saw, or I asked other students, and just wrote and rewrote and rewrote and rewrote and rewrote. Okay. And what happens is they would learn how to write in English for their theses. And you ask them, okay, how do you do this? And like, I don't know. They just assimilated it, which is what most people do. You just assimilate the process and you don't think about the elements that are there and how you break it down. And this creates problems, and it creates discussions, but the discussions are just based on ignorance. And that's by clash. And I don't know what. I'm assuming you guys probably suffered some of those things in your process of learning English and taking classes related to English. That people say, I mean, I've seen it all the time. People show me a comment that says, look, it's got questions marks on it and circles. Like, what's this mean? And I'm like, let's look at it. And then you start going through, okay, no. What they mean here is this sentence doesn't link back here. That's why there's a question mark. And it's like, well, why didn't they write that? Because consciously, they don't know that. They just look through it and go, this isn't right. But they don't know exactly why it's not right. And that's what's part of what makes working with writing in a second language sometimes complicated.
Yes. And I think that this is highly related with our experience writing the thesis now as part of the program in applied linguistics, because, well, I think that we all have experienced that type of frustration when we are thinking in Spanish and we are trying to write that in English, and then we receive feedback from our thesis directors, and sometimes the comments are not about the content, but how you write, and especially in academic writing. So as you mentioned, is often associated with rules and conventions that we have to follow in order to write. So how do you think that in this case, for example, thesis directors or even instructors could balance the need to teach these conventions while still encouraging creativity and critical thinking among students? Because sometimes I think it is a hard process, and as we are they tell us to follow certain rules, but at the same time, we cannot be that creative. And you mentioned that you were told that you weren't being like enough in your writing just because you were thinking on your L1. So how do you think that teachers could manage this situation?
It's complicated. First, you have to separate writing into its two elements. One element of writing are conventions. Conventions are punctuation, choices in style. Okay, right? But then there's rhetoric. Rhetoric is not open for debate. Rhetoric is the way a group of people organize their language. In Spanish, we organize our language with long sentences with several clauses, and we overlap and we refer back and forth to multiple themes and reams inside our writing. That's the way we do it. That's not open for discussion. I had to learn how to do that to write in Spanish. Okay. I can do it now. I don't do it as naturally and freely as somebody whose Spanish is their first language, but I can do it now after. In English, we can't do that. Okay, that part's not open for discussion. But the part that gets difficult, and something could be done, is usually where what teachers outside of ESL, when they're in academic programs, their comments tend to be on conventions. You need a semicolon here. You need a comma here. You should start the sentence over like, well, conventions. Well, one, that's not writing. That's editing. And there's two ways you can approach that. One, you can do it yourself. Two, you can hire a professional editor and they can go through your theses and do all of the convention stuff, and they'll do it for you like in 3 days and probably charge you a couple thousand pesos. But conventions, those things, there's flexibility, there's movement in those to a certain degree. But that has nothing to do with your thesis. A thesis is what you're supposed to be looking at, the idea that you're arguing. Okay. Not tell somebody, I don't like this word. Who cares? Honestly, you don't like it, don't look at it. I mean, it's not about liking or not liking what's there. Okay. I don't know. I learned how to work with different coworkers, and I don't like, to this day, most of the coworkers I had, their particular style, how they write. I don't like it. To me, it just doesn't fit with who I am. But I've never said anything to them about that because it's their writing voice. And if I don't like their writing voice, that's my opinion. And that's totally irrelevant to anything that's going on. Okay. So I don't know. You have to kind of put that on the side, put your opinions and your ego on the side. So you discuss the idea. Okay. If there's something structurally wrong with the writing, the sentences aren't linked together correctly, you mark it. Look, hey, from sentence 3 to 4, you're missing this word to link these together. This one here, this idea doesn't refer back. You have to change that because this is a rhetorical convention of the language and it's necessary. That's one thing. But, the other part says, those phrases, I don't like the way this sounds, or I wouldn't use that word. Well, it's not your thesis, it's mine. I'm going to use the word I want to. We all have our thing, okay? I like the word underlying to such a degree that my thesis supervisor one told me, he just goes, Troy, I really like your thesis. You like to say underlying just like I do. And I was like, so I did a word search in Word, and I'm like, dear God, the word underlying appears like 1,000 times in my theses. And I'm like, that's shame. It's embarrassing. Shouldn't be repeating that same word over and over. But I mean, everybody has you have a voice in writing the same way you have a voice when you speak. And that voice, when you write, it's of who you, okay? And that is not open or up for debate, discussion, criticism, or questioning, because it's a piece of who you are. So, I mean, you need to you can look at the parts of it objectively. It's like, okay, you started this sentence with this subject, with this noun, but the second sentence is not referring back to it. You can't do that in English. Okay, that's fair. That's okay, because it's structural, a part of structural writing. You have to see those elements. How do you get somebody to do that? I do not know the answer. I do not. I spent, well, my entire PhD was on writing. My master's degree, everything I did was about designing writing material and looking at writing. And I was always looking at writing because when I was in college and I took my English composition class, I took my first one and I got an A, told I was a brilliant writer. And all through high school, I was told I was a brilliant writer. Second writing class, I failed every single paper. And the teacher told me I was an idiot, told me I was stupid, I had no ability to write, I shouldn't be in college. And I was like scared. I didn't know what to do. And I was like, what am I going to do? And final day, I went to his office to get our final grade. I went to his office, and he was in his office, and he was stoned, having smoked a bunch of marijuana in his office, and he was drinking in his office, completely out of it. And he came in, and I sat down, and up on his wall was a picture from Puerto Escondido. And I just went, oh, you've been to Puerto Escondido? And he just looks at me, he's like, yeah, it's beautiful. He goes, you've been there? And he starts talking about his vacations for a long time. And he goes, you're really stupid. You're an idiot. But you know what? You went to Puerto Escondido. I'm going to give you a B instead of failing you. Okay. I didn't understand everything that happened, but that's when I first realized at the point in time in my life, apparently there's no rules for writing, or there's a lot of flexibility here. And so then I come to Mexico and I start studying as an exchange student, and I write essays for my classes in literature in Valenciana, and I turn them in. And a really nice teacher I had up there, wonderful lady, she told me one day, she goes, Troy, she goes, I really like your, and you read a lot, but you've got to do something about your writing. You sound like a 6-year-old child. It is so boring, your writing. It doesn't sound right. It needs to be more Mexican. It has to have more complexity. And I just, okay, thank you. But I didn't understand what she meant. Okay. But over time, in my master's, I figured those things out. What she was telling me was, it's Spanish. You need longer, more complex sentences. You need to mix ideas together. And like, okay, now I know how to do that. So how are you going to teach it? I really don't know. And unfortunately, all this I've done with writing, but look at the own department where I worked. Who gave writing workshops and taught about writing around Mexico? I was never invited. A lot of my colleagues have given workshops, talks about writing, and I've actually gone, and I listen to them and I don't say anything, because they never say anything about writing. All they do is talk about conventions, punctuation, what type of font, do you put the title here? That they never actually talk about writing. And honestly, I don't know exactly what to do about that. I have online relationship with other professors that are very heavy into rhetoric and writing. And I've talked with them over the years, and they tell me the same thing. No, yeah, my colleagues just they don't get it. I answer how to fix that. The reason why this exists is because when universities were created, the first subject that was taught was a thing called trivium, which was 3 elements. You had to learn rhetoric, okay? And you had to learn, what was it? You had to learn rhetoric, language. I can't remember the third one. But why did they teach rhetoric? What was rhetoric? How to structure or written language in such a way to make it pleasing and effective and persuasive to other people. Okay. And that was part of universities for a long, long time. In 1921, I think it's 1921, I might be wrong in a year, in Harvard University, they made the decision to separate rhetoric and composition into 2 separate classes. And that's where in the US, this thing was born of having 3, 5-paragraph essays, term papers, thesis statements, longer structured things. And they began to teach all this explicitly. And the rhetoric, which was, how do I organize my language? How do I make it come together and work in an acceptable way so it's effective for people to listen to it, suddenly became part of activities that only people who studied English literature or world literature were the only people who saw that. So the only people who actually look at rhetoric and look at it closely are students who dive deeply into literature. And everybody else just looks at composition, which is part of the puzzle, but not all of the puzzle. It's just one of the pieces. And then that separation worked in the whole educational system in the US. Mexico copied a lot of the structure of its primary, secondary, and high school system from this design that was in the US. And so it's just kind of sort of spreading. But the way this is taught, this isn't taught that was the way in Europe. Like the instructors I had in England in my PhD, one of them told me, he goes, I really enjoyed your theses because I didn't realize that all this stuff went on in the US and it's going on in Mexico. He goes, in England, he goes, if you learn how to write, it's because you get a good teacher. He goes, my history teacher sat down for 6 months and worked with me once a week for 6 months and showed me how to write elegantly in English. He goes, that's where I learned how to write, because we have no writing classes and there's no composition classes. We don't even have them. Oh, okay. But I mean, for me, went through that growing up. I had compositions every year in junior high school, every year in high school, 2 years in college. And it was all about this structure and all of these conventions. Is it properly punctuated and capitals and da, 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 da? But there was never anything about how do I make this writing effective or impact people or interesting. There was none of that. So, I mean, I really don't know what the answer is. I think there's a problem, and I think the problem still exists. And I think there's a lot of people who work in second language teaching and in second language training that honestly have absolutely no clue to what are the elements that govern writing and rhetoric, but they're there. And unfortunately, if you take a class and you have a teacher, that person has a certain level of power over you, and you have to adapt to whatever they're going to do. That's what happens. And they're probably not going to help you. I mean, my thesis, I was just told in England, you sound so ignorant and so American, you have to fix it. But nobody told me, they didn't tell me what to do. I had to go find somebody that could show me what I needed to do to fix that situation. But I think when we train our teachers, we can prepare them to be more flexible and open on this topic. That's what I tried to do the years that I taught the class on techniques for reading and writing. When I taught writing in the BA, and so I tried to give, hey, look, we have to be humble and flexible when we approach this, because there's two big elements here. And it's okay to discuss conventions and make sure they're okay. That's fine. But you don't attack a person's writing voice. That's a very personal element that we all have. And nobody likes to have, I mean, you don't like it? Fine. Okay. Some people like blue, some people like green. That's just a taste or an opinion. It shouldn't be up for discussion. It's just part of who we are. So I guess the summary, I don't know what to do, and I really can't tell you what to do. I don't know what the answer is exactly, but we do need more information and more awareness on that topic. Don't know. Yeah, honey, I don't know. We need more. I think just raising awareness and being more conscious of what we're doing, and mostly being humble. That's probably the biggest thing. That's hard to do sometimes.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for your answer. Now, in your thesis, you also mentioned how the dominant role of American English composition theory is the standard for evaluation. Why do you think this perspective has become so influential in ESL grading instruction? And do you believe that using American English grading conventions as a benchmark can create challenges for multilingual or multicultural students?
If you use it as a benchmark, yes. You should use it for what it is. It's a benchmark if you're writing something for an American audience. But if your audience is anywhere else in the world, then it's irrelevant.
Well, for instance, in your thesis, you mentioned that this benchmark is something that sometimes causes limitations when writing in English in a different context. Could you tell us why do you think this variation of the language is used as a benchmark, at least in the University of Guanajuato? because it still happens to this day.
Well, it's just because it's the easiest way to do it, I guess. The US has a very structured writing composition system that works primary, secondary, and high school. And that structure, it's very easy to organize it and replicate it. And it makes an easy way to have material to work with. And then you add in too, I mean, where we're at here in Mexico, I mean, the majority of the people who teach English in Mexico, it's more than likely their English has probably been learned in the US or has some US influence. And there's lots of US instructors inside of Mexico. I'm sure you found those too. I mean, you find lots of primary schools and private schools. You know, you go to the English department, you know, and they got 4 teachers over there. Okay, one, they got a psychologist, an accountant, an engineer, and a gardener. And what do they all have in common? They were in the US 5, 6, 7 years. And so what are they doing? They're teaching English the way they learned it. Well, if they're in the US, what did they learn? They were probably bombarded with this type of compositional structure. So they're just going to, they're repeating it back. I mean, it's the same thing that I did when I started teaching English. You got to show them how, you got to work on writing. What did I do? I went back to what was taught to me in my composition classes in junior high school and in high school. And I was using that. I had the writing handbook from my high school. And I was like, oh, perfect. This is what I'll use. This will be my handbook for writing. It's like, well, no. I mean, for our students here, is that useful? It depends. If you finish your degree and you go work for a transnational company from the US, be very helpful. If you go work for a transnational company from Europe or from Asia, not really. It's not going to be so helpful. But I think people tend to fall on that because the way writing is taught in the United States in the system is very structured and organized. It's not taught like that in Europe. So it's easier to British, it's easier just to take these things from the US. Okay, this is kind of organized and structured and broken down little pieces. This works for textbooks and for material, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily the most effective way or the appropriate way that you want to go about teaching the written aspect of language. And then the other part that influences this too, that we don't talk about it enough maybe, you're a second language teacher. So you're doing 2 things. One, you're doing language acquisition. Speaking and listening has to do with acquisition. And we all have something in our head, we don't know exactly what it is, that assimilates and works all this stuff out. But reading and writing are human skills. People invented reading and writing. So it's something you have to be taught explicitly. It's a cognitive learning process. You do not acquire reading and writing. It has to be taught to you explicitly. And that's when it's taught to you in the primary school. And that influences how you approach that activity. So how you were taught to read and write, wherever you were at, that's going to influence the way you come back and approach reading and writing when you deal with it, because that's the way you were taught as a child. And we have got to forget about that. It's like we always talk about the 4 skills in language teaching. And I'm like, well, okay. So listening and speaking, acquisition, okay, reading and writing, cognitive. So those got to be separated. They have to, because things, and you have to approach them very differently. But we don't do that in the second language classroom. We have a method to do everything, and it doesn't work that way. It's not going to function. That's not going to happen. And at the end of the day, the way it works out is, okay, you learn how to speak and how to listen. The reading and the writing, well, the reading, I'm not saying if on your own, the writing, well, you'll figure it out some. If you have to write where you work, you'll figure it out. Or wherever you're working, you'll have a colleague or somebody's going to go, hey, no, you don't do it like they do this. Why? I don't know. It's just the way they do it. You know, that's how I learned to do it here in Mexico. Like writing my thesis, that you start por medio de presente. Why? The document's here. I don't need to say that. That's just redundant. You have to. Okay, I have to say it. So I'm going to put it in there. Okay. All right. Now I know you put that down there. It has to do with courtesy, politeness, and when you're writing in Spanish, how are you polite in the United States? You don't do that. The document just starts, I need this, because to be polite, you save people time, you don't put extra words, you don't waste their time. The approach is different. So I get it's kind of having to figure it out. And I don't know. It seems like that's the way that's still going on. People just sort of have to figure it out. Nobody actually helps them.
And that, well, I don't know if that answers our next question, because our next question is, what do you think many ELT instructors receive little formal training in teaching writing skills? But for example, in this case, you were talking about the Mexican style and how we deal with all of these conventions. Do you think this is related with like the reality that most of ELT instructors didn't have any formal training in teaching writing skills?
Yeah, they don't. I honestly, I think from everything I've seen, I would say most people are on some level afraid of writing. It's when you're speaking, you can always save face. And if you're talking to somebody and they make a really strange face, and you can go, "Whoa, no, no, I didn't mean that." Okay, but I'm trying to adjust, repair, and modify, and you can work it out when you're there face to face. But when you write it, there it is. Person sees it one time and that's it. You have no chance to fix anything. It's got to be perfect when you get it out there. And the way people respond to what you've written sometimes can be very aggressive and very painful. You've been working on something for 4 or 5 months, and all you get back is somebody puts a bunch of question marks and says, "I don't understand this." And it's like, that doesn't feel good. So I think things like that makes us kind of want to stay away from it. The same way too when you're trying to publish. You send in an article, you do a research project, you work on something for a whole year, you send in an article, and then somebody goes, "I don't think this is relevant to anything that we're interested in." Oh, okay, now what do I do? You know? And I've seen feedback that Mexican colleagues that I have in different disciplines, they send in an article publication, and the only feedback they get back is, you need to take your article to native speakers so they can make it sound better. That doesn't make you feel good. So I mean, putting something in writing and then putting it out publicly, that's a very personal thing, and it can be intimidating, and it can make you very nervous because you don't know how people are going to react and what they're going to do. And sometimes what people say it sometimes can be hurtful. That's probably not, I don't think that's anybody's intention, but that's how it kind of comes. Somebody said I sound too American and it does not work. That didn't make me feel good. But at the same time, I was trying to think, okay, if I was raised in the United States, how am I going to learn to be not American so my writing sounds good over here in Britain? How am I going to do this? That's the hard part, because you're trying to find an answer to correct or modify something or change something. And if the person can't tell you explicitly what it is and how to do it, it leaves you in the situation is awkward, because if I can't tell you exactly what it is I think you should modify in something you've written, and I just say, "Oh, it's confusing," or that needs to sound differently. Well, what happens is, if you're in a teacher-student relationship, or you send things to publication, the other person has all the power. So, if you will, you have no agency. You're helpless. I have to fix something, but I don't know exactly what it is. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to fix it, but I have to do it. That doesn't make you feel good. And so I think people tend to avoid it. I mean, look at your friends, family, people that you know. How many people do you know dedicate a large part of their work life or daily life writing things for other people to read? It's not many people. People don't like to do that. Okay. They avoid it. Think about it. Look at family members or friends or people you know. They have to do something, a government process. They have to deal with something, and they have to write a document. Do they just write it, or do they search and look for other people to help them do it? It's writing something and giving it out to the public. It's It's intimidating, you know. Even a conference presentation, you go to a conference, you think your presentation's okay, you think you got everything together, but you don't know what people out there in the audience are going to do. When I gave a presentation on this idea of rhetorical clash in Canterbury at a conference, and Rod Ellis was in the audience, and I had him for a one seminar degree, and I gave a presentation. He was sitting in the back, and he was smiling and almost laughing, and I was saying, "Oh God, what's going to happen?" And I get to the finish, and he just gives his hand. I have a question. Oh, great, here it comes. And he's okay. So the students are having trouble with conforming to English writing standards. Who cares? If they can't do it, they're not going to be accepted. So why should we even worry about it? That was his question. And I just said to him, I said, well, if you're going to be a language teacher, you're going to claim that you're preparing students, you're going to be aware and you're going to be sympathetic to where they're coming from. And then after the thing was, he walked in and he goes, did you like my question? Wasn't that fun? And I was like, no, it wasn't fun. I didn't enjoy it. Did I say that? No, I was just like, yeah, thank you. He thought he was having fun, okay? And he was being funny. I didn't enjoy that. But you don't know what can happen. And that's very intimidating. Not everybody likes to go out there and do that. I think most people avoid it. You have to be very brave, okay? Think what you do every semester. You've written X, and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people. If you have a seminar, maybe 5, 6 people that come from God knows where, they look at it too. And every one of those people looks at it and they have a particular take on what they saw. And you have to deal with all those different things coming at you. That's not, we call it, that's not something everybody wants to do on a daily basis. Okay. There's more enjoyable things they can do with their time.
Okay, thanks for your answer, Dr. Crawford. Now we have one more about the challenges that you experienced during your research process. What were your challenges? How was your experience conducting this research?
I don't know. It's time consuming.
Time, please.
I look at what you guys have now available, and boy, God, I wish there was artificial intelligence, and I wish there were those automatic translating machines when I was doing this. It took me 5 years to do my PhD, and half of my time was spent mostly just transcribing interviews and then organizing them. That was that part. And the other part, I guess, too, it consumes your life to a certain degree. If you look at your personal life is probably a little bit different right now than it used to be. And you probably even have friends or family members that are like, are you still reading those stupid articles? Are you still writing that thing? Can't you do something else? They're just tired of seeing that all the time. And that can be frustrating. Because if you're doing something, you want your friends and family to say, hey, you're doing a good job. And family and friends really like, oh, you're doing this? Okay, good. It's like, let me know when the graduation is. I'll be at the party. The other stuff I don't care about. We just want to be there for the party. That can be frustrating. Well, I told some of you this, I think this, just keep in mind you're doing a master's degree, so you're going to join an elite club. Not many people in the world have a master's degree. And you've decided to do it, and it's going to require sacrifice and time. So you're sacrificing, you're investing the time. Take advantage and enjoy the benefits that come with having done it. That's about all you can do.
Yes, and I totally agree. I think that it doesn't matter the type of research that you are doing. It is time consuming, and you have to sacrifice some things in order to achieve the goal of finishing that thesis, right?
Yeah, and nobody's going to care. You show you give your thesis at the end, you finish, and you go, Mom, Dad, my thesis, and they go, oh, that's so cool. And then it gets put somewhere on a shelf, and nobody will ever look at it again, talk about it, and it just sits there. My PhD thesis, I took it to my grandfather, and one of my uncles just picked it up and was looking through it. And after 5 minutes, just looked and he goes, "Did you really write this?" That was the only question comment. Yeah, and that's all it is. It's just I have my PhD right there, sits there, big blue thing, sits there on the shelf. Since I put it on the bookshelf, it's never been removed from there. It just sits there.
No, but I think that is a good feeling when there is someone who is interested in what you did and that they are able to understand. Because, for example, in my case, what I'm doing my master's degree, I don't have like people in my family who understands what I'm doing and
Mhm.
like the purpose of my work because they think that I'm writing this or I writing my thesis because I want to be a better teacher. And that's what they think. So I think that, as you mentioned, this is a elite group, and I think that is good to have these types of exercises when we talk with other people that are more knowledgeable than us, and they can share about the research that they have done in order to learn more.
You need to make your own community. Every time you have an event, you meet people from other universities, and you got to start picking your own network of people that are going to be around you during your career. Your professional network is going to be more limited than many other people's. Okay, because the interests and the issues you deal with are very specific and require more training, reading, studying. So people you're going to interact with, it's going to be more limited in scope for professional things.
Thank you so much, Dr. Troy. Now, looking back on your research today, what do you think remains relevant about second language writing and identity in contemporary classrooms?
So it's always going to be there. You learn to write a particular way and you develop your authorial voice, and that's always going to be there. So when you start, by now you guys have read enough, you start recognizing how certain people write. I imagine too, I'll bet you could probably identify articles written by some of your teachers. There's no name, no nothing there, just by the way it's written. You go, I know who wrote that. I recognize that. And you recognize how the person writes. That's always going to be there. People say, oh, AI is going to change all this. It makes things faster. It's another tool. But I've read now, I don't know how many things that are written by AI. I recognize it instantly. I just look at it like, okay, that's AI has its own voice too, and you recognize it. So that's going to be there, and it's always going to be part of a person's identity. The question is, how much do they use it? Talk to your average person in any place in the world, probably writes nothing once they leave school. Maybe a resume, a note, stick it up on the refrigerator, text message. But most people, not many people write something of consequence in this or something that's published. That's very rare. And most people avoid writing as much as possible. So I mean, it's going to be there, but the people who deal with that, it's not everybody in the world. It's a more reduced section of the population, people who spend a lot of time writing. But it's always going to be there because you're always going to need the written language. We use it all the time. So I mean, it's going to be there. What form we put it in, most of it's electronic now, so that speeds things up. It gives you access to more things. If you want to read, there's more things available to you faster than there used to be, but it's going to be there. But at the same time, too, it's going to change because people created it. And right now, there's a lot of pressure that's modifying it. So it's going to change. How exactly it's going to change, we'll have to wait and see. We don't know. But artificial intelligence is going to play a strong impact on it, and it's going to modify a lot of the ways we do things with writing. Who knows what's going to come out of it? But it's just what we are. I mean, you use WhatsApp now. I mean, before WhatsApp, it was SMS messages. We have those things. Look, this is so new. It's just an electronic postcard. It's just a postcard. It's faster, it's quicker, but the way we do it, the mediums and the technology we use has changed, but the reasoning behind it is still there. So, I mean, it's going to still be there, and people are going to still need to have face-to-face communication. And there's still going to be places where we still have to write. It's going to be there. What are those places? How we're going to use it? It's going to be changing and adapting, but it'll be there. Who knows what it'll be like? 40 years from now, well, you'll be sitting somewhere and your students will be interviewing you, and you'll be telling them about all the archaic old stuff that you did, okay, compared to what they're doing right now. But it's going to keep going on because we're people and we keep doing the same stuff.
Yes, it is true. So thank you so much. To close today's episode, we sincerely thank you, Dr. Toy Crawford, for sharing your research, experience, and reflections on second language writing, discourse communities, and identity in language education. Your work reminds us of the importance of understanding how culture, rhetoric, and classroom practices shape the experiences of language learners and teachers alike. We truly appreciate your time in science and valuable contribution to this podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
And thank you to our listeners for turning into this episode of Lingua Vis. We don't forget to subscribe and share. And until the next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. See
Bye.
you. Bye.